Okay, this might be my last climate recap video, at least for a little while. The reason why is because I've started a weekday podcast called The Climate Recap. And you can find that podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or on YouTube at The Climate Recap. I also post scripts and source links via Medium for The Climate Recap, so if you would prefer to read the news, that is an option too. This way you can get up to date on the latest international and US-based climate news in 5 to 10 minutes, Monday through Friday. And I chose this route because I felt like oftentimes by the time I got to these recap videos, it was already half out of date. I really do want to get back to doing videos. I would love to do like weekday climate recap videos because also like the videos were just getting far too long. So I think it would be more reasonable to do a week video at 15 minutes or 20 minutes than, you know, my 40-minute videos that you will get to see again today. But I think that this is the right decision for me and for the news right now because a lot of people like podcasts anyways. So I think it could give me an opportunity to expand my audience. All that being said, if you are interested in podcasts, or if you know people that are interested in getting a quick little news bit in a podcast, then this might be a better opportunity for them to stay up to date, for you to stay up to date on the news, and just stay up to date, like more up to date than you would from these climate recaps. But that being said, I really hope that everybody sticks around and just tries out this option as well, because I will continue to post videos on the Beckosphere, but Beckosphere will mostly be for deep dives and commentary videos, at least until I am able to afford getting an editor to expand the amount of videos that I could produce, because I really would like to do weekly recap videos again, but I don't have the time because this is, again, on the side of a full-time job that I also have. If you would like to support me on Patreon to be able to pay for an editor, then I can get those weekly videos up faster. Thank you to everyone who has supported me and supported this channel. It continues to grow and I just absolutely adore this community. Y'all are such thoughtful and kind and supportive individuals, and you really do give me hope for the future and just the direction that this channel is heading. So thank you very, very much. Okay, anyways, let's get right into it. Hey y'all, it's Becky here from the Beckosphere, where we talk about climate news and solutions. You have entered a climate recap, where we look at what is being done to reduce the impacts of and prepare for climate change. This time, we will look at climate news for the first half of Earth Month, so April 1st to 15th. If you would like to stay up to date with the latest climate news, I highly suggest that you hit the subscribe button below and ring the bell so you don't miss every single time I post. And you should definitely check out the Climate Recap YouTube channel for daily updates. Okay, let's start with some climate events. A massive fire started near the Pivardi Valley in the last day of March, which worried glaciologists because the valley is home to 279 glaciers. One researcher said that he hasn't seen anything like it at that high of an altitude in his 40-year career. 80 forest fire incidents had been reported in that area over those last 2 days. It's one of the regions of the world heating up faster than the average. I can't find any updated information on the fires though, so hopefully they've mostly gone out by now. Meanwhile, over in California, the Sierra snowpack for January to March was the lowest level since the gold rush, 38% of normal. This was followed by a heat wave in which some places reached over 90 degrees. Throughout this historical mega drought though, California's water conservation efforts aren't as strict as with water use in previous drought periods. Definitely not as strict as Chile, which issued an unprecedented water rationing plan for its capital Santiago the following week, as the drought there entered its 13th year. The plan has 4 tiers from green to red, starting with public service announcements, then restricting water pressure, then rotating water cuts of up to 24 hours for about 1.7 million customers. What tier they're on depends on the water levels of the 2 local lakes. That same week, Tropical Storm Maggie made landfall in the central Philippines. Over 100 people died and 1,700 were displaced from landslides and flooding. This actually is supposed to be their dry season right now, so yikes. And in South Africa, over 300 people died after a cold storm drenched the country, officially making the storm the deadliest on record for the country. Some areas got 18 inches of rain within 48 hours. Now over to some climate studies. A new report made by the World Resources Institute and Climate Focus emphasized the importance of protecting Indigenous people's rights as an essential solution for meeting the Paris climate goal of keeping warming under 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. According to the report, forests owned by indigenous groups in Brazil, Colombia, Mexico, and Peru take up twice as much carbon as other lands. A United Nations report found that areas owned by tribes were 50% less deforested on average than other lands. We have so much to learn from indigenous people. Naturally, we gotta talk about the 3rd United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report released 2 weeks ago. There are already several great videos done by fellow climate YouTubers, which I will link in the description, but here are a few things that I want to highlight from the report. 1. Colonialism is at the root of climate change, and indigenous rights are at the forefront of climate change solutions. The word colonialism made it in the IPCC report for the first time, as it was described as an ongoing driver of climate change as human and environmental exploitation continues to increase emissions and reduce poorer countries' resiliencies. Likewise, the report also emphasized the need to embrace indigenous knowledge and techniques moving forward. 2. Fossil fuels are a one-way ticket to stranded assets, so it doesn't make sense for countries to keep investing more in them. About 30% of oil, 50% of gas, and 80% of coal reserves must stay in the ground if we are to keep warming under 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. 3. We know what we need to do to stop climate change, and we have the vast majority of technology already to do it. It'll be a lot of work, but it's relatively straightforward. 4. Greenwashing is a huge problem, and often climate finance gets misused. 5. As new urban spaces continue to pop up around the world, designers need to be proactive in creating spaces that are more energy efficient and environmentally friendly, as cities are a huge source of emissions and pollution. And 6. At this point, we need carbon capture technology to keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius, but we need to be careful with how we approach and prioritize it. Simon Clark did a great video on the nuances of this discussion, so definitely check that video out. In another recent study, Colorado state researchers predicted an above-average Atlantic hurricane season, which would be the 7th above-average season in a row. They're expecting 19 named storms and 9 hurricanes. The average is 14.4 storms a year, but 2021 saw 21 storms. Later that week, another study was published looking at what global executives think of their company's climate goals. The International Harris Poll for Google Cloud looked at top corporate executives' feelings on sustainability. It found that 80% of executives polled rated their companies above average in their sustainability work, particularly in the finance and tech sectors. Yet only 36% said their companies even had the tools to track this information. Possibly even more interestingly, 58% of those executives polled thought their companies were greenwashing themselves. In other words, making themselves look more environmentally friendly than they are. This number was especially high in North America, where 72% of execs admitted this. But many execs also said sustainability goals were as high of a priority as research and development. Google Cloud says that these results show the need to put data in the hands of decision makers. And a new Stanford study comparing the quality of life and energy usage in 140 countries found that 75 gigajoules a year or less is enough to power a good life. For context, a gigajoule is about 8 gallons of gas. Americans use 284 gigajoules a year on average. The author in this study said this, quote, "This suggests to me that we could nudge energy use downward in a bunch of hyper-consuming countries and not just make a more equitable world, but perhaps make ourselves healthier and happier." A happy life is determined by looking at the following metrics: access to electricity, air quality, food supply, Gini coefficient, which measures wealth inequality, happiness, infant mortality, life expectancy, prosperity, and sanitation. All but air quality peaked and leveled off at 75 gigajoules. Lastly, a new study published in the journal Nature thinks atmospheric rivers are responsible for the recent influx of ice sheet collapses in the Antarctica. I like Axios' description of ice shelves as doorstops because they hold back ice from falling into the ocean, which then contributes to sea level rise. The atmospheric rivers are bringing moist hot air from the tropics and subtropics to the poles. The study says it's causing 60% of further collapse of the Larsen C ice shelf. Larsen shelves A and B already collapsed in the early 2000s, likely because of these atmospheric rivers too. Over to climate victories now. On March 30th, the European Commission took aim at throwaway culture, publishing new proposals at the end of March designed to make sustainable products the new norm. It adopted a circulatory economy framework in 2020, and these new proposals flush this out further. A circulatory economy is a model that reuses all of its materials in products to minimize waste and mineral extraction. This involves making products more durable, repairable, and recyclable. It also bans planned obsolescence and greenwashing. Planned obsolescence is when a company purposely makes products that break down easily so people have to buy more. The proposals include a circulatory economy action plan, plans to make almost everything more eco-friendly, circular, and energy efficient throughout its life cycle. It will also require manufacturers to disclose the environmental impact and recyclability of their products within what they call a digital passport. If these new proposals are not vetoed by the European Parliament and Council, they could go into effect as early as the end of this year. This would be a very big deal. Then, almost 2 weeks later, Sweden became the first country in the world to include consumption-based emissions in its climate targets. It will now look at all emissions made by its imports in order to get even that part of its emissions to net zero by 2045. The Global Carbon Project calculated that when abroad emissions are included, they account for about 60% of Sweden's emissions. The United Nations also launched a group to look into net zero plans in an effort to prevent greenwashing. It'll be a group of 16 who will look at pledges and plans from companies, banks, investors, cities, and regions. To aid a clean energy transition, Japan's Nissan is working with NASA and UC San Diego to develop a new type of battery for electric vehicles that can charge quicker and be lighter yet safer. Called an all-solid-state battery, this new battery type is safe enough to be used in pacemakers. The team is trying to avoid using expensive rare minerals in their design. Nissan expects to have a pilot plant up and running by 2024. Let's finish off with some new records. For the first 3 months of 2022, renewables generated more electricity in the UK than gas and coal, according to the market specialist Enapsis. Wind on its own generated nearly as much energy as gas-powered plants after a record wind turbine performance. It represented 70% of renewable generated power, which includes biomass. In the US, the Energy Information Agency announced that on March 29th, wind represented the second largest supplier of electricity generation in the US, second to natural gas. This happened again on April 12th. While it's just barely above coal and nuclear, this shows a big shift for the country's energy generation. Now on to some climate fails. Make sure to wait till the end of the featured articles for my favorite climate victory point. Congratulations, we have officially hit 420 parts per million this month for the first time in history. This is the highest level of CO2 in the atmosphere the world has seen in the last 4.1 to 4.5 million years. We took our first measurement in 1958 and then it was 316 parts per million. As you can see from the graph, the growth is exponential, not linear. The little ups and downs are based on seasons as plants intake more carbon during the spring and summer when there is more growth. Nearly 60% of the 358 human rights activists that were killed in 2021 were land, environment, and indigenous rights defenders, according to Frontline Defenders. That percent could be higher though, as some places report better than others. There is very little data, particularly out of Africa, on environmental defender deaths. The deadliest country for this group of heroes is Colombia, just like it was in 2020, which was the deadliest year for land, environment, and indigenous rights defenders in known history. Mexico and Brazil are in second and third place. The Ukrainian war, to some extent, is pushing countries to speed up their clean energy transition, but it's also making oil producers more popular as countries, in an effort to move away from Russian oil, are more desperate for other avenues of oil. This is reportedly giving them the upper hand in deciding how much influence they will have over the next International Climate Conference, COP27, in Egypt in November. The United Arab Emirates Energy Minister put it like this, quote, "Oil producers felt unwanted in COP26, felt like we were in a corner. Now we're superheroes." In COP26, the UK banned fossil fuels from sponsorship deals, but this is unlikely to happen in November. Methane emissions jumped by a record amount in 2021, beating the record previously set by 2020, according to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA. Methane is a more potent greenhouse gas than CO2, but it doesn't stay in the atmosphere for as long. It's the second most emitted greenhouse gas behind carbon, and it mostly comes from fossil fuel activities, livestock farming, habitat destruction, and landfills. During the UN climate conference last November, over 100 countries agreed to cut carbon emissions. But some of the top carbon emitters, China and Russia, did not sign this pledge. China made a commitment to stop building coal plants overseas in its Belt and Road Initiative, but it made it clear that it did not include projects currently under construction. Climate scientists predict that these projects currently under construction will release 300 million tons of CO2 equivalent a year once they're built. That's about equivalent to 64 million cars on the road. The biomass industry might be behind the European Union's watered-down biodiversity rules that could limit the amount of wood being taken from woodlands, according to documents leaked to DeSmog. This is particularly the wood-burning power plant Drax and the U.S. Industrial Pellet Association. Burning wood pellets, which is not good for the environment or human health, represents 13% of the EU's renewable energy supply. The demand will grow as the EU tries to shift away from Russian fuel. And now for some chemical fails, which are all in the US today. A new report by the Real Urban Emissions Initiative found that in New York City, people of color are 17% more likely to be exposed to small particulate matter from diesel trucks than white people. Particulate pollution has been linked to irregular heartbeat, worsening asthma, and other heart and respiratory threats. A main culprit of this is older trucks that were made before new emission standards. Trucks made before 2007 only represent 6 to 10% of diesel trucks on the road, but contribute 64 to 83% of the particulate emissions from diesel tailpipes. You gotta replace those old trucks. And a new study has linked severe black lung disease among Appalachian coal miners to exposure to silica dust in their jobs. This has been suspected for decades, backed with tons of anecdotal evidence, but this is the first study to show a clear connection between silica and the disease. Scientists have found silica dust lodged in miners' lungs. This problem has actually gotten worse over the years, as the study shows more prevalence in modern miners than older ones. Researchers say that this shows that current silica regulations, which are 50 years old, are very much out of date. Now for my favorite climate victory point of the video. Portugal's first auction of rights to build and operate floating solar plants on dam reserves set the world record low price for future output, $4.50 per megawatt for 15 years. The company that offered the negative price on solar energy, a unit of the country's main utility company, EDP, said it's because the project is a hybrid that also includes wind and energy storage, which should make it profitable. Now let's list off some other news points during the first 2 weeks of April that I didn't have time to go in depth on. Though I did go in depth on more of these in my podcast, and I actually published more podcast episodes on Apple Podcasts than I have on YouTube, just so you know. For other events, India's northwest reeled under an unusually early heat wave. Meanwhile, a record-setting cold snap hit Europe, particularly France. Climate change is making Afghanistan's hunger crisis worse. Sydney, Australia asked thousands to evacuate as more heavy rains caused more flash floods. Africa is facing rising climate-linked health emergencies, according to the World Health Organization. Uganda is fighting crop-devouring armyworms, which they blame on climate change. And marine sponges have been observed bleaching in the warming Tasmanian waters for the first time. Over in the US, tornadoes leave people trapped in their homes in Louisiana, and an elderly couple was killed and more than 200 homes destroyed in a New Mexico wildfire after a controlled burn went rogue. Now for some more climate change studies. For the first time, a peer-reviewed study shows that current official and unofficial climate pledges can keep warming below 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. But we need to follow these pledges to a T. Keeping warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius is very unlikely. Hydrogen is 11 times worse for the climate than CO2. 60% of cacti species might go extinct from climate change as early as 2050. Climate change drove extreme rains in Southeast Africa's storms earlier this year. Think of the back-to-back storms that hit Madagascar a few months ago. Soil carbon is a blind spot for the Europeans' national greenhouse gas inventories. Bird populations in Panama's tropical rainforest are in a severe decline. Summer Lake in Oregon might run dry within a generation if no action is taken. And the 4-H Club, with the help of the Harris Poll, found that most 13 to 19-year-olds prioritize the environment over the economy. Now for some other climate change victory headlines. The EV market continues to take off around the world. Countries have contributed more financial support for building back greener now than they did in 2021 and more than they did after the recession. There's a new network for crisis scientists around the world to team up in cases of another pandemic or a bad wildfire season. A report shows the Ukraine war will not derail Europe's energy transition. An ex-Putin aide says a full embargo on oil could stop the war. Greta Thunberg is in process of publishing a go-to source book on climate change with the help of Dr. Katherine Hayhoe and Margaret Atwood. A global hub was launched to help countries slash methane emissions. Over to India, women are leading the charge in planting mangrove trees to secure their coastlines. Queensland, Australia started a green hydrogen and ammonia project to be powered by renewables. Indigenous Australians derailed a controversial gas project by suing the South Korean government. The EU announced it will do whatever it takes to rebuild solar energy manufacturing in Europe. Europe plans to invest more in trains to reduce fuel reliance. France installed its first offshore wind farm. Germany unveiled plans to accelerate green energy expansion measures. German lawmakers called for the EU to ban Russian oil after visiting the Ukraine. Britain's bought more electric cars in March than the whole of 2019. The Greater Manchester area is conducting peat bog restoration. Just Stop Oil continues to be a nuisance for the UK government. Extinction Rebellion scientists glued their hands to the business department in London in protest. Extinction Rebellion activists also infiltrated Shell's London headquarters and shut down Lloyd's of London for a day. UK newspapers have begun publishing more stories on climate change, and their editorials are showing more support for climate action. And more than 300,000 homes in England are now better protected from flooding. Canada released a big new climate action plan. In the US, Y Combinator gives money to climate-based startups during Demo Day. The Rappahannock tribe gets 465 acres of land back on the Chesapeake Bay. Washington State created the first seagrass and kelp sanctuary off Everett. Pinterest banned climate misinformation. Stanford engineers created solar panels that can generate electricity at night. US tapped $420 million to boost water supplies hit by climate change. The Biden administration rolled out new fuel efficiency rules. The Department of Interior reversed a key Indian Affairs policy, making it easier for tribes to control their own water infrastructure. The EPA launched a civil rights inquiry into Louisiana's health and environment agencies. A group of private donors pledged $41 million to monitor the thawing Arctic permafrost. A plastics to fuel project in Georgia was canceled. The White House launched a $1 billion program to boost conservation with the goal of preserving 30% of federal lands and waters by 2030. Facebook dismantled a Brazilian climate change disinformation network. The majority of Americans support Biden's latest climate change proposals. West Virginians protested in front of a coal mine owned by West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin. Los Angeles announced new purchasing plans for government-owned vehicles to increase the number of EVs. Boston announced progress in electrifying the city's vehicles. Indigenous communities in the US received $46 million to adapt to climate change. California revealed a plan to phase out new gas-powered cars by 2035. UC Berkeley is pursuing geothermal energy to decrease building emissions. And young Montanans are suing their state government over prioritizing fossil fuel finances over their future. This will be the first suit of its kind to be heard in court next February. Now for the two it's whatever headlines. Too many options on how to decrease a person's environmental impact can result in them making less decisions. And Stripe, Alphabet, Meta, and other companies joined forces to fund carbon removal. Only problem is that they get to count this funding as carbon offsets. Now for some climate change fails. Polar science threatens to crack under the strain of Russia's war with Ukraine. ExxonMobil announced a $10 billion oil investment in Guyana the same day the IPCC signals countries should end fossil fuels. The US and Europe are behind the majority of global ecological damage. A Dutch coal-fired plant has chosen to remain operational longer than planned. A controversial coal mine expansion in Narrabee gets final approval from the New South Wales planning commissions. Australia's renewable boom is fading as investors lose confidence in the government. Alberta, Canada spent $22 million paying for unpaid land rent for oil and gas operators instead of making them pay for it. Canada also approved a $12 billion Bay du Nord offshore oil project. And Canadian banks doubled financing of the highly polluting oil tar sands, despite all promising to decrease fossil fuel financing. Over in the US, an appeals court says the US downplayed a coal mine's climate impact. More than 800 solar projects in Bay States are stuck waiting for review. A Pennsylvania court blocked the government's carbon emissions plan. Oil producers are under pressure to boost output but are facing constraints. I guess that's a good one and a bad one. Big Agriculture is printing children's books saying that pesticides are great. The Supreme Court revived a Trump-era environmental regulation. US authorities have found a malware attack in industrial plants, likely from Russia targeting LNG facilities. Biden's plan to aid Europe with LNG proposes a risk for the US climate goals. 5 years after Hurricane Harvey, and many in Houston are waiting for help still. US solar expansions are being stalled by rural land use protesters. A wind energy company pleaded guilty for killing 150 eagles. And in California, the Wildfire Prevention Program has yet to complete a single project, and PG&E paid $55 million for its part in 2 deadly wildfires. Now to some chemical fails. Microplastics have been found deep in the lungs of living people for the first time. Microplastics and pollution combined are much more toxic. A new era of air pollution in the tropics could have a huge human toll. A new study found a link between air pollution and substance use disorder. And 3M cut its output of PFAS used in chip productions. Over in the US, half of the waters are too polluted to fish and swim in. The EPA is working on banning formaldehyde and asbestos, both of which cause cancer, but it chose not to limit perchlorates in drinking water. Scientists sounded the alarm on the EPA's new forever chemicals definition, which they say is too narrow. Farm pollution will be harder to stop under a new proposed Kentucky bill. A new Washington state bill becomes the fastest timeline in the nation for phasing out PFAS, and the Environmental Working Group released its latest list on the most pesticide-ridden crops in the market. And that was the climate recap from April 1st to 15th. Phew! That was very dramatic. Please let me know in the comments below which news points you found the most interesting. Again, if you want some more details on it, check out my podcast because there's some more details on some of the news headlines that I said but did not fully cover. I really do hope to add end of week recap videos someday soon because I know we all like the videos and I do too. And not everyone can keep up with a daily podcast. But for now, check out the Climate Recap podcast on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and I will keep you up to date with any changes in the future. Until next time, remember to talk about the climate crisis every single day and to support your local news organizations. A big thank you to the people on Patreon who are helping me pay for my equipment and the many news subscriptions that make these recaps possible. A special shout out to the climate confident and courageous David H., Norman Anol, Greg H., Paul B., Phil Plasma, and Holly M. I greatly appreciate your support. If you would like to monetarily support the work I do, please check out the Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee links below. Bye for now.